stunt double this evening because unfortunately he's in LA. So I am going to be doing, in Ed's words, some ventriloquism and present on his behalf. Anyway, good evening. Welcome to the school's evening lecture series. Before we begin, I just need to mention that next week there'll be another lecture on Monday, which is Roger Sherman from UCLA, and on Wednesday is the opening of the faculty exhibition Primitive Delights. Tonight we're very pleased to welcome Ed Dimendberg to the school. Ed is a professor in the School of Humanities at the University of California, Irvine, where he ranges across 3 departments: film and media studies, visual studies, and German. Before UC Irvine, Ed also taught at the University of Michigan, Columbia, SCI-Arc, and UCLA. He received his BA from Brown University, his MA from New York University, and his PhD from the University of California, Santa Cruz. From 1990 to 1998, Ed was a sponsoring editor at the University of California Press and is currently an editor-at-large for the University of Minnesota Press. Ed has received fellowships from the German Fulbright Commission, the J. Paul Getty Trust, the Graham Foundation, the Canadian Centre for Architecture, and the International Research Centre for Cultural Studies in Vienna. In 2009, he was the Daimler Fellow in Residence at the American Academy in Berlin, and he is also the author of the highly regarded book Film Noir and the Spaces of Modernity. In addition to his own scholarly work, Ed is a tireless supporter of the academic and publishing careers of others, and there are many of us in this room who have greatly benefited from Ed's insights and advice. Although this is an often invisible and thankless task, Ed's generosity means that he has contributed greatly to establishing a larger context for the serious discussion of the arts, architecture, and the city. To extend and formalize these efforts, Ed has also recently established a consulting practice to assist writers and scholars develop manuscripts for publication. In terms of his recent work, Ed's book Dilys Scofidio and Renfro, Architecture After Images, will appear soon from the University of Chicago Press, and he will present part of that project tonight. He is also working on a study on documentary representations of Los Angeles, including films by Raina Banham and other artists. As you can tell from this range of projects, Ed's ability to move fluidly between discussions of art, architecture, design, and the city make him a key figure and model for the kinds of discussions that have been happening here in the School of Architecture, but also across the UIC College. Please join me in welcoming most warmly Ed Dimendberg.
Thank you, Penelope, for that gracious introduction. It's wonderful to be here in the school and to be back in Chicago and to remember what a city is actually like, something I forget every day since I live in Los Angeles. And it's also wonderful to be at UIC, which shares the same initials with my own institution, UCI, and unfortunately both institutions share some of the same challenges and problems at the moment, including the fact that most of the faculty probably won't have pensions by the time you retire. So I look forward to working into my 90s and having all of you here as colleagues as we teach with our canes and walkers and wheelchairs in order to support ourselves. But it's wonderful to visit the school and to see so much tangible evidence of your commitment to the built environment and your commitment to thinking about public space topics important to me, and which I will be talking to you about this evening. There were really 2 segues to this talk, 2 ways of understanding it. The first is that, as Penelope mentioned, it is in fact an excerpt from a book that the University of Chicago Press will publish on Dilys Scofidio and Renfro that I've been working on for a very long time. And this is a case study. There's an even longer version. If you're sufficiently masochistic, you can read it in the book when it comes out. But this is a project that I've been particularly fascinated So this is a case study in the history of Diller stick video and Renfro, but it's a problem, I think, or it's a way of approaching the problem of understanding what media architecture is, or understanding what media architecture should be. And the reason I think this is becoming an increasingly urgent problem, and one that will probably, like so many other problems, sneak up on the architectural profession, but not, I hope, before it's too late, is because it's now becoming cheaper to build with pixels than it is to build with conventional curtain walls. It's possible to have smart architecture, and it's possible to have architecture with moving images and with images that are programmable, and essentially to turn every surface into a screen. And the technology, as we all know, exists to do that today, and it's only becoming cheaper than conventional construction technology. So what we're living through is a moment when these smart walls, although more often than not, they turn out to be dumb walls, because what you actually see on them is not very interesting or not very challenging. And part of the intent, or part of the provocation of this particular talk, is to ask the question, how might this architecture of smart walls, how might this architecture of media become more interesting rather than less? How might it become more challenging rather than less? And I don't have any definitive answers to that, but I have some theses, and I have some arguments that I will share with you, and I hope we'll have the chance to talk about them after my talk. What you see here, I'm going to begin with a few projects by Diller stick video and Renfro that many of you no doubt already know. What you see here is the Institute of Contemporary Art building in Boston, which I assume many of you have visited. This is a museum that was completed in 2006, and the first new art museum in Boston in a century, and really quite astonishing. The first contribution to the museum typology in 100 years in that city. And to me, the most lively part of the building, the most robust architectural element, is this room that I'm sure many of you also visited, the Media Tech. And you're in this room, and you're looking out through a window at Boston Harbor, and many people, there's an angle of the window which is canted and doesn't allow you to make up a horizon line, and many people walk into this room and they think that what they're looking at through the window is a screensaver. So this is a nice example of how Diller and stick video are exploring the variations, the tensions, the similarities, and the differences between screens and windows. I think this is a very important part of their architecture. And this is one of the opportunities they've had recently to explore it and to put some of these concerns into their practice. Another Diller stick video Renfro project I'm sure many of you have visited. This is the renovated Alice Tully Hall at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City. And this is not a particularly good photograph of the element that I find most suggestive in this particular design, which is that the walls of wood are translucent and light actually flows through them. So this is an example of how the architects have employed a material one doesn't typically associate with translucency or transparency, wood, in an unusual and I would argue innovative manner. And once again explores their concerns with the visible and with seeing. This is a composite image of a 1994 project called Overexposed, in which they checked into a hotel room and began to videotape people in offices across the way. And at some point this becomes like a rear window scenario when the people notice that they're being videotaped. Well, what's interesting about this project, there are many interesting things, but one of the interesting and not immediately obviously known facts is that the building was designed by an SOM architect, not a very well-known one, named Natalie Dubois, although she's receiving more attention now. And the architects spent a great deal of time searching Manhattan for a curtain wall building whose window dimensions would be identical with the aspect ratio of the video frame. So this is a type of image-making production in which architecture and the features of moving image technology mesh very nicely and very elegantly. And of course, it's also in dialogue with the film, I'm sure many of you know, Jacques Tati's 1967 film, Playtime. This is the High Line that I'm sure many of you have also visited. Phase 1 completed in 2009. And this is the southernmost terminus of the High Line at Gansevoort Street in New York's West Village. And this was to be a transparent wall that marked the beginning, or depending on how you define it, the end of the High Line, since you really can navigate it from north to south or from south to north. And initially, when this was designed, the hope of Elizabeth Diller was that this would be a wall through which the visitors to the High Line would be able to observe the local meat market. And I know the idea of the meat market and the butcher is a very popular one at the school, so you should feel a tremendous sympathy and solidarity with this work of architecture for that reason. And the idea that Diller liked to circulate was that you would be able to look through this transparent window wall and watch all of the poor little furry innocent animals be slaughtered and turned into your dinner. And in fact, when you look through the wall, there are not very many butchers around, but there are plenty of people sitting at cafe tables drinking cappuccinos. So this is a nice example of how an architect's vision of the future did not quite turn out the way she had imagined. Another element of the design that I think builds upon this exploration of transparency is this sunken amphitheater that looks out on 10th Avenue with what I think of as the most utterly banal and uninteresting view in all of New York City. But nonetheless, people sit and they photograph themselves in front of this glass wall, right? Even though by any reasonable standard, there's absolutely nothing to see here. It's a completely boring, banal, not particularly visually interesting Manhattan street. But it's become a favorite spot for visitors to photograph themselves before, for families to sit in front of. And for me, this is an example of something I find in the work of the architects, which I think of as a kind of psychoanalysis of built space. They invite us to ask, what is it that we expect from transparency? What is it that we expect from a window? What is it that we expect from a space that allows us to connect the space we're in with the space beyond it, with interior and exterior? And as I think you'll hear momentarily, this is a very important concern with in the project I'm going to be discussing tonight, Facsimile. Another project, and people sometimes say, what was the most difficult part in researching your book on Diller's video, Renfro? And the most difficult part was actually getting to see this particular installation, which is called Travelogues, and which is in Terminal 4 of New York's Kennedy Airport. And in order to actually see this, I had to do something I would recommend everyone do at least once in life, which is to go through U.S. Customs in reverse. You go to the airport and you land at the, you get out of the train or the taxi and you walk into the airport and you go backwards through customs. So you go against the flow of people arriving in the United States. Because this project, which is a series of lenticular images, is in a sterile corridor. And it was enormously complicated to finally, I won't bore you with the details, but it was enormously complicated to finally be able to visit this. It took me many, many tries. But I saw it, and it's an example of a media installation, which is interesting for the fact that it requires almost no maintenance. It essentially requires the lenticular screens to be dusted off, and maybe once in a while a light bulb behind them needs to be placed, but that's really it. And these images you can't really see in a still photograph, but they change as you walk by them. And you have to walk by them in order to discover the story that they tell. So in a way, this is a kind of quasi or proto-cinematic project, since a series of still images connect together and tell a story. And these projects suggest some of the ways that Dillard's with video are interested in media architecture, which it's hard to know where media architecture begins. Where does this term begin? Where can we find early examples of it? And certainly one early example would be this structure. I'm sure all of you know Kathleen's 1920 model for his monument to the Third International, which involves the media in many ways. It was to contain a radio station. It was to be a media broadcast facility. It's interesting how many innovative examples of architecture, one thinks of Lincoln Center. I saw the Bertram Goldberg exhibition today, and I had no idea that Marina City actually contained a television studio, that this was an important element of the initial design. Is it still functioning? Does anybody notice whether, no, but that was part of the design, the same way, NBC was part of the design of Rockefeller Center. But part of Kathleen's project also involved a projector to project images onto clouds. And of course, the most famous element of the design is that it rotates, that these different cylinders rotate at different speeds. So it's a work of kinetic architecture. A less well-known example of media architecture, this is Oskar Nitschke's 1936 House of Publicity. Nitschke was actually involved with the architecture of the United Nations building in New York City. And this is a not terribly well-known project in which signage is combined into the architecture in suggestive and asymmetrical ways, and suggests already how by the 1930s the need to incorporate images, both still and moving into architecture, was making itself felt. And a design I'm sure many of you immediately recognize. This is Robert Venturi and Scott Brown's 1967 design for the National College Football Hall of Fame competition. One facade of which, there are other facades, I can't really see the only facade of which, but the main facade of which is a large billboard, and it incorporates a surface for the projection of moving images. And thus we end up with examples of media architecture, which in some ways I find not entirely satisfactory. It seems to me that if we define media architecture in a robust and challenging way, if we want to push the envelope and ask how might this qualify as challenging architecture, we need to demand four qualities be present. We need to approach it with four criteria. And the first is that the architecture is something more than a flat surface, that it's something more than simple frontality that we see, for example, in the Venturi and Scott Brown exhibition. When you go to the movies, or increasingly you watch DVDs at home with your television set in front of you, it's largely an interaction between the screen, the flat surface in front of you, and your body. And of course, there have been attempts by filmmakers and media makers to present more immersive types of moving image experiences. You can think of the various panoramic types of cinerama, various types of 360-degree screens. that have been invented and utilized, but have never really caught on for most media production for fairly obvious reasons having to do with the complexity of making moving images for these types of screens. So what I would claim to you is that we need something in architecture that's more than a flat surface, that's more than Venturi Scott Brown's decorated shed, and may have elements of frontality, but it's something more than frontality. And it seems to me that what we in fact need is that this media architecture construct a robust three-dimensional space. I mean, to me, this is still the most significant distinction between moving images and architecture. Even the most banal example of architecture allows you to move through the space and feel as if you're immersed in it and engages multiple senses and is something more than a relationship between something that's in front of you to your body. So it seems to me that three-dimensionality is absolutely essential, and the media architecture can't just be in front of us, but it has to be around us in some way that's more complex than simple frontality. I would also suggest that robust media architecture, challenging media architecture, needs to explore relationships between interiority and exteriority, and to scramble them, to challenge them, to complicate them, and to do something more than what most billboards do, or what most signage does. Although, when I said this, when I first started teaching in architecture schools, my friends and colleagues immediately chastised me because they said, you don't realize how difficult it is to design good signage, which is absolutely true, I later discovered. It's very difficult to design good signage, and you look at all the signage in the world, and you immediately realize that most of it isn't very good. So, I have much more profound respect for signage today than perhaps I did, 10 or 15 years ago. But nonetheless, it seems to me that media architecture is not signage. It has to be something else. And, finally, my fourth criterion, and I mentioned something beyond frontality, a challenge to frontality, a robust three-dimensional space, an exploration and complication of interiority and exteriority. And the fourth criterion I think is very important, or the fourth quality I would like to see media architecture possess, although I have no delusions that most of it ever will, and that anyone is ever going to follow my preferences, but I just prefer to live with a certain delusion nonetheless. But I would like to think of media architecture as evolving movement. And it seems to me that what architecture offers us is the ability to move through space in ways that are more complex than the sort of movement elicited between you and your iBook, or you and your television set, or you and the movie screen in the local multiplex facilitate. So some possibility of movement between the viewer, the person in the city, the person looking at a building, and the architecture seems to me also to be desirable. And this brings me back to the question of what should media architecture be. And one possible answer that I would suggest to you is proposed by this project I'm going to talk to you about tonight, Facsimile, by Diller, Scufidio, and Renfro. They commenced work on it in 1996, and I think of it as the most cinematic of their projects, for which they filmed 24 hours of scenes in a studio environment. There still are not a lot of architects who have filmed 24 hours worth of moving images for one of their projects. For me, it provides numerous insights into the conceptualization of the relations among architecture and moving images. The San Francisco Art Commission, the SFAC, a public agency supported by the city's Art Enrichment % for Art ordinance that funds the cost of public art for up to 2% of the construction budget of new or renovated civic structures, commissioned Facsimile. Do you have such a a program in Chicago that generally produces really bad, ugly sculpture in front of new buildings. As a great city, I'm sure you probably do. The art produced normally is not very interesting. The only creatures that seem to like it are pigeons. But this project was produced by this particular type of program in San Francisco. They won the commission, and interestingly enough, they were up against quite talented competitors for this project. Some of the other applicants in the pool who submitted entries were Jenny Holzer, Namjoon Paik, and Anish Kapoor. And they won the commission to install their project in a building you see here on the far right of the image, right over here. This is the George R. Moscone Convention Center, located at the intersection of 4th and Howard Streets in downtown San Francisco, surrounded by a park that you see in the center of the image, and shopping complex called Yerba Buena Gardens. The Moscone Center hosts trade fairs and professional gatherings. The paradox of realizing a public art project in a setting normally closed to the public immediately captivated Diller and Scofidio. So one of the paradoxes, many paradoxes of this project, is that it was for a public art commission in a building to which the public has no access. And if you look up the Moscone Center on the internet, you will see that there are hundreds of groups that hold trade fairs and conventions in it every year, most of which we've never heard of, various industries, various lobbies, various companies releasing products, and unless you have a badge granting you admission, you can't get in to the space when these groups are using it for one of their functions. Architects Helmut Obata and Kassadam, one of the largest firms in the US, like Gensler, one of the large whales of architecture. There's so many firms that are more like minnows or maybe like plankton. Designed Moscone South, the oldest part of the complex that opened in 1981. Gensler designed the two additions, Moscone North and Moscone West, and here you see Moscone West. And they designed the addition with Michael Willis and Quan Henry Architecture, which opened in 1992 and 2003. In 1996, the Art Commission circulated a request for qualifications that stated, quote, "A major consideration for the client is the visibility of the building and its identification as part of the Moscone complex," end of quote, since it was located a block away from the older structures. After screening a national pool of 62 candidates, the selection panel chose Diller and Scofidio in 1997, and on June 15th, the architects signed a contract with the Art Commission to design and implement the project. A series of renderings dated February 24th, 1998, settled on a single design for a bank of 20 video projection units mounted above the roof line, and I'll show you an image of this in a moment, below which a pan-tilt camera would alternate between interior views and scenes of the city. Scofidio noted, quote, "The panorama view descending slowly to the sidewalk will build in speed from a slope to a free fall. The external views will be integrated with internal ones, specifically at the escalators. We would like to use for both video and text intervention." So these next few images are a series of renderings by one of the first employees of Diller and Scofidio, New York architect Lynn Rice, and they explore some of the 50 or 60 different schemes that Diller and Scofidio developed for this project before deciding on the final design. This particular one involved embedding LED text into the sidewalk, and it was eventually vetoed because it would be difficult to maintain. And the traffic department of the San Francisco city government thought it would be too distracting to drivers. This is another project that involved text alternating on the side of the building, on the facade of the building, a bit like the signs you see or used to see in railroad stations of changing destinations and trains. Before, of course, this type of signage went digital. This is another variation of the design that involved video cameras moving up and down, visible through the curtain wall window, and a kind of moving arm or pivot. And this is the design I mentioned earlier of a series of video monitors mounted above the cornice of the building. And at the bottom of the image here, you see a series of views in plan from over the escalators in the building. So the idea was that there would be closed-circuit television cameras broadcasting from above over the escalators, and that this would be broadcast to these video cameras mounted in a bank over the roof line of the building. And the video displays would sometimes display images of the city and sometimes display images from inside the building. This scheme is modified again in the proposal submitted by the architects on May 27, 1998, that proposes, quote, to layer new skins in front of the section of curtain wall on 4th Street, composed of a thin LED video system subdivided into a grid of discrete screens that will serve as a display surface, end of quote. It drops any reference to text display and emphasizes the alternation between live and pre-recorded images, and now calls the project Second Skin. In the request for proposals completed by the architects on October 21st, 1998, so my point is to suggest to you how many iterations this design went through before the architects finally selected the final iteration. This description is retained, and display hardware further specified as 16 individual panels, each approximately 6 feet high by 8 feet wide. Responding to a query from Scofidio, structural engineer Alan Burden sends a fax on December 8, 1998, that explores the possibility of a triangle-shaped assembly on a top track and bottom guide that moves the display around the side of the building between 4th and Howard Street. And this is a page from the architect's sketchbook exploring alternate designs for a single moving image monitor, and literally a moving image monitor because the monitor would move around the facade of the building. The possibility of designing the armature in a Y shape is dropped because of its resemblance to a TV antenna. By 2001, the technical challenges of installing a moving monitor along the facade of the Moscone Center introduced complexity of a new magnitude. Building and engineering a mobile screen of this size would prove the most complicated architectural challenge of facsimile, one for which no precedent existed, that in effect added a third project to the two earlier ones, the exterior video monitors and the alternation of live and pre-recorded scenes. So in effect, what this project is really 3 projects in one. Remember those old television commercials for Certs Mints, two mints in one? And this is really three buildings in one, or 3 architectural projects in one. You have a moving screen moving around the facade of the building. You have a screen that alternates between the display of images taking place inside the building, images that are pre-recorded, and images that are recorded in the city outside and beyond the building. And you have the challenge of displaying images on a facade of a building in the first place. No one knew how to construct such a moving screen until Scofidio discovered a man named Les O'Cradlick, whose company in Nevada, Polex West, is an engineering firm specializing in aerial tramways and amusement park rides, and whose work included the roller coaster of the New York Hotel in Las Vegas. So this is the point at which avant-garde architectural media and the infrastructure of mass cultural spectacle come together as perhaps they never had. In order to build this project, very experimental, no precedent really existing for it. Diller and Scofidio needed the engineering expertise of someone who was building roller coasters and someone who was building aerial tramways. That was the technology that was necessary in order to get this working. Working with Publix, Diller and Scofidio now changed the display technology on the moving video armature to a single 15 by 25-foot panel rather than 16 individual monitors, whose rear would feature, so there's an image you see from outside the building, and on the back of the moving monitor, there's a project that you can only see from inside of the building. And this was to be an alphanumeric scrolling LED screen designed by Ben Rubin of the Ear Studio of New York City and Mark Hansen of the Department of Statistics at UCLA. And this project is called Retelling, and it involves displaying text on an LED screen, text that's culled through a program that Rubin and Hansen wrote for real-time data feeds from online news stories circulating on Google. What had been a relatively smooth working process, and here are a rendering of the single moving screen with its armature to move it around the facade of the building. What had been a relatively smooth working process, although a slow one given the step-by-step establishment and coordination of design standards with multiple vendors, began to slow down in the summer of 2001. The first LED manufacturer was fired after it proved unable to deliver a product customized to the needs of the installation rather than a standard sports stadium screen. So another important technological precedent is the type of screen you see at a baseball stadium. You know, that was the existing technology that the architects found themselves confronted with, but ultimately did not want to use. And they began to look for another supplier that could actually build something that would work for what they had in mind. And by April 2002, they found one, a new vendor named Multimedia, and it's obtained the job after submitting a bid to fabricate a screen at a lower cost. And in a memo of May 31st, 2002, the president of Multimedia, George Pappas, writes to Matthew Johnson, one of the architects in Diller and Scofidio who's been most involved with this project, and refers to the installation for the first time as facsimile. It features synthesized and refined earlier design iterations. Here you have a view in plan of the track of the installation around the side of the building and moving at the designated speed, which is rather slow. It takes about 45 minutes to move from one end of the track to the other. And here you have a section. 2 cameras mounted on the screen would be suspended from the 100-foot-high vertical armature held at the parapet in the soffit. One camera would be positioned at the rear of the sign and directed on the interior of the second floor pre-functional space. Here you see the camera that is looking to the inside of the building. A second camera mounted on top of the armature would be trained on the horizon of the San Francisco skyline and would allow for footage to be recorded. And here you see the camera that is looking out to the city of San Francisco. A pan tilt controller in a room on the first floor would allow for changes in camera position and the adjustment of the zoom lens. And when I imagined what this actually would look like, I thought of something a bit like, you know, the war room in Dr. Strangelove. I imagined that this was going to be a really high-tech, super sophisticated space. And when I actually visited the Moscone Center and got onto the roof and looked at the armature from above, and then it was later shown the room where this controller was designated, I was really completely crushed to find that it was essentially a broom closet with a computer in the corner. Very, very simple technology, but nonetheless technology that required highly customized programming to alternate between interior and exterior views and to allow for the camera, for both cameras to alternate between pans and tilts and zooms. Pre-recorded video footage would be the third source for processing by a server that would receive data from the motion control system, allowing for updates and allowing for the generation of wipes, fades, and dissolve effects between live and staged images. So the sort of effects you have in film. The essential features of facsimile as an architectural display technology alternating between pre-recorded and live images were now in place. Devising a daily schedule for the operation of the media project entailed a distinction between Category A, normative uses, in which 30 or more schedules of live and staged images were mixed and matched, and Category B, in which 15 schedules of pre-recorded images and skyline views could replace the real-time images of the building. In effect, and this is an important point, turning off the cameras inside the building for the clients of the Moscone Center not wishing their events to be publicly displayed on the building exterior. While unwavering in their support of the project, the convention facility did insist upon the rights of groups to control the broadcast of images from inside the building, and cited growing concerns about security after September 11th, 2001, as well as the proprietary nature of many product rollouts and promotional events held inside the convention center. Normal hours of operation for the installation were set between 7 o'clock in the morning and 11 o'clock at night. On May 22nd, 2002, Diller presented storyboard concepts to the Visual Arts Committee of the San Francisco Arts Commission and met with enthusiastic approval. A representative of the Moscone Center, particularly taken with the project, even requested that its staff be filmed in the pre-recorded sequences, an option impossible to pursue at the time because of time constraints, but one that Diller noted might be realized in the future. She predicted that facsimile would be up and running by late October or early November, and the challenges of pre-production led her in July of that year to request a postponement of the opening until March 2003. At this time, Diller and Scofidio also requested an upgrade of the screen from 18 millimeters to a higher resolution 12 millimeter display, a prospect that Moscone would consider only after the final cost of the track armature became known. And one of the challenges of working on this project is as the architects began to work on it, the technology began to evolve. Display technology was changing very quickly as they designed, and they found themselves in a game of continually trying to catch up with the new technology as they were designing, as they were building. But what do the images that they actually selected, that they actually filmed, look like? All of the video for the pre-recorded scenes was shot in an office building in Bloomfield, New Jersey, from October 14th to October 25th, 2002. And during the second half of that year, Diller and project leader Matthew Johnson became, in effect, independent film producers. They scripted 21 office vignettes, 21 night scenes, and 23 hotel vignettes. Here you see one of the hotel vignettes, along with night scenes, close-ups, and scenes of a nighttime janitor and window washer. Production designer Paul Avery built the sets wall to wall within the width between the mullions at the Moscone Center. So once again, an interesting and highly unusual instance of the design of moving images following the design of a window in the building. Like the video recording of the offices in overexposed, the aspect ratio of the camera and architecture needed to coincide. Although the time coordination of the camera tracking on the dolly with the 45-minute round-trip movement around the facade of the Moscone Center necessitated even more elaborate pre-production. A custom dolly was fabricated to travel between 5 and 10 miles per hour past the sets of the hotel rooms and office cubicles arranged in a row. And here are some examples of the hotel rooms and office cubicles. This is what I refer to as the happy married couple It's amazing how travel always seems to bring out the best in a relationship. This is what I refer to as the typical academic department view of the world. And this is what I think of as what I would like the typical academic department to become. The office cubicles. For those of you who know a rather well-known film from the 60s, The Apartment, directed by Billy Wilder, they recognized the design of cubicles here, which I think was the dialogue of that particular film. Instance of self-referentiality, the image on the wall is from a piece of internet art that the architects designed called Refresh. And here you see what happens when you move from one set to another, the office conference room on the left, and what looks like a waiting room for job applicants on the right, and the camera, of course, moves by both of them. Video's employment of the tracking shot as a device to convey a single continuous space was a significant aesthetic choice that links facsimile to the work of virtuoso practitioners of this technique. Film directors such as Friedrich Murnau, Orson Welles, Michelangelo Antonioni, and Miklos Janšo. Although recorded on celluloid, recorded on video, not celluloid. Here, this is a video, not a film. Facsimile hinges upon an element of film language that has obtained its most elaborate realization in narrative cinema, and the tracking shot suggests its indebtedness to older-moving image technology and its tradition of spatial investigation. A note by Johnson conveys the intricacy of filming the office scenarios. Quote, each of the primary foreground scenes will be filmed using the same set, which will be reconfigured between takes based on the spatial arrangement needed for each character. Continuity will be established in post-production, running seamlessly from scenes A, B, C, D, and back to C, B, A, and looping up to 4 times. As the video makes its circuit, each scene develops in real time. The development of that scene reflects the amount of time spanned in between. Each scene will be filmed on separate days, or possibly 2 per day, running the camera back and forth according to the timeline and storyboard established for continuity in post-production. Scene A will be filmed, the set will be changed out, and then scene B will be filmed. End of quote. Over 250 individuals auditioned during casting calls, and 100 actors were finally selected. Filming took place from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily, with a crew of 20, and a cast of 30 to 40 people usually present. Cinematographer Dan Gillen filmed, and Johnson and Diller directed. At the end of the shoot, 250 shots comprising 24 hours of footage was the result. Averaged over 11 days, 130 minutes of footage, the equivalent of a long feature film, was recorded daily. Rushes of the scene were later viewed on a billboard in Times Square that the architects rented. A unique experience, as cinematographer Dan Gillen recalls. So the architects were very concerned with the question of how these images would actually look from a city street. So they rented some time on a billboard in Times Square and displayed them and took notes and once again weeded out those that were ineffective and those that they felt were most compelling. They selected.
While filming in New Jersey proceeded, San Francisco Art Commission Director, Public Art Program Director, Jill Manton, discovered that facsimile was over budget, a problem exacerbated by a bill for $80,000 in sales tax that the Commission had received from the State Board of Equalization for the fabrication of the monitor by multimedia. Although works of art purchased by the city were exempt from state sales tax, the initial position of the California Tax Board was that the screen did not meet this definition. Manton turned to the Office of the City Attorney, and a request for advice was submitted by the Deputy City Attorney, A.D.K. Vera, in which he argued, quote, "Facsimile screen is not raw material, and it is not part of the Moscone Center's architecture. In facsimile, the screen acts more like a painting than the wall behind it. This screen, which has no use apart from effectuating the artist's contemplation of the final work, which is conceptual, not utilitarian in purpose. As a result, a court would likely find that it is art," end of quote. On May 30th, 2003, the State Board of Equalization issued an opinion that upheld this argument and relieved the San Francisco Art Commission of any tax liability for the purchase of the monitor. Its repercussions were wider ranging than anyone might have imagined. Diller and Scafidio now found their work legally defined as art, not as architecture. While awaiting clarification of the tax issue, Manton became aware of the growing pressure faced by the Moscone Center from large corporate clients. And the two largest corporate clients of the Moscone Center were, of course, Apple and Microsoft. And they saw this screen on the exterior of the building and claimed that when they rented the facility for one of their events, they should be entitled to use the screen for advertising. And it was an ideal medium for publicizing their product and publicizing their events. Further consultations by Manton with the Deputy City Attorney underscored that the Arts Commission, and the Arts Commission alone, retained exclusive jurisdiction of the work as mandated by the San Francisco City Charter. After the ruling from the Equalization Board arrived, Manton drafted a statement that you see here in June, summarizing the non-commercial character of facsimile. Working with technologies first employed in advertising and stadium signage, Diller and Scafidio had in effect created a new category of public space for artistic expression whose legal protection was now guaranteed. How far this would extend in practice, and whether Moscone clients retain the right to turn off the second floor lobby public video transmission without violating the public art definition of the project, still remains undecided, however. Installation of the armature and motion system components and the LED system took place on June 11th, 2003. On July 8th, the Sheedy Drayage Company was replacing the bushings of a roof bogey, and in the process of jacking it up, unsecured and unbraced wooden logs they had used failed and slipped, causing 40,000 pounds of the carriage and monitor to crash into the roof of the building and produce noise and vibrations throughout the structure. The monitor that worked flawlessly when first demonstrated now misfunctioned. This is the architectural equivalent of whiplash that you experienced in a car accident, I think. Diller and Scafidio found themselves caught in a legal conflict between Multimedia and Sheedy over who would pay the estimated $100,000 for remanufacturing the LED screen and replacing its damaged diodes. Damage to the architecture necessitated the construction of an elevated arm along which the screen would travel. It also produced water leakage that required installation of the new power supply. Yet Manton noted that during a test, quote, "People who were standing on the sidewalk near me were mesmerized by the screen," end of quote, and that by January of 2004 it was fully functional. On the evenings of March 29th and March 30th, it in fact proved overly functional, as she discovered after receiving an emergency telephone message informing her that the screen had turned itself on during the middle of the night and was disturbing senior citizens living across the street. By November 2005, the bogey affected during the accident was still producing a loud banging sound each time the motion system was activated. Diller and Scofidio confronted the possibility that the piece would need to operate with the screen in a fixed position. Kraglik recommended repairing the curved portion of the roof track and strengthening the frame. Early in 2006, it appeared that at least some of the noise problem was being caused by flaws in the original curtain wall construction, for which installing a Teflon plate was proposed as a solution. After additional evaluations by outside and city engineers, the Arts Commission decided in February 2008 that redesigning the wheel and bogey elements of the motion system and reinstalling new components designed by Kraglik were the most promising solutions. Sheedy Construction agreed to provide crane and rigging services at no cost, and Diller and Scofidio returned their fee to help refinance the retrofit. The contract with Polex West specified completion of the retrofit in 2010. Over the course of the 14 years during which Facsimile was in design, under construction, or being repaired, the project was widely published and regarded by many observers of the work of Diller and Scofidio as fully operational, a telling reminder of the chasm between renderings of the project in Photoshop and actual construction and operation. And I would suggest that a definitive aesthetic and cultural reckoning with this project awaits the completion of the retrofit some 14 years after Diller and Scofidio first began designing this public art commission. Should the Moscone Center staff eventually collaborate with the architects on programming for the screen and enabling those who work inside the building to appear as actors on its exterior, sometimes in real time and other moments in recorded images, the meaning of the project and its exploration of the boundaries between liveness and performance are likely to shift yet again. Diller and Scofidio might well attain, in a complex urban architectural setting, the aspiration of video artist Ira Schneider, who in 1969 spoke of his video project Vertical White, quote, as helping people to better realize the objectifying experience, seeing themselves from outside themselves, which potentially could lead to the realization that we are all actors, or that we are not realizing our potential, end of quote. Realized by two of the largest architecture firms in the United States, HOK and Gensler, the glass curtain wall of the Moscone Center building has, of course, become a dominant cliche in American urban revitalization, an almost invisible element of contemporary space in American cities. Working in the idiom of public art, Diller and Scofidio sought in Facsimile the possibility of an alternative practice that would allow us to see this new, but hardly unprecedented architecture afresh. Moving camera and moving screen take on the conventional function of the window and challenge the pretense of architectural transparency to convey spatial interiority and the pretense of electronic media and broadcasting to present liveness. Neither conventional window, nor cinema screen, nor television set, nor computer monitor, Facsimile is visually undecidable, for the viewer may not always be certain when and where the images he or she see transpire. Although vastly different in technology and effect from the architecture analyzed by someone such as Siegfried Gideon in his book, his 1928 book, Building in France, where he talks about only film being able to make new architecture visible and movement being an important element of film. Facsimile nonetheless realizes a blurring of boundaries that makes its own cognitive claims in the context of vastly different spatial conditions, vastly different, that is, from the conditions that existed in the 1920s when Gideon was writing. Its didactic role was not to present or promote new architecture or new spatial conceptions, but to take the existing culture of curtain walls and video monitors and to expose their presuppositions so as to foster a critical skepticism. The claim that architectural transparency and urban media screens have become socially opaque, a common gesture these days, is less radical than to construct a work that makes good on this claim and reveals the limits of the visible. And to me, the project is striking for the willingness of the architects to suggest to us that not knowing that undecidability are in fact virtues, that these are not necessarily bad and to be avoided. Like the moving monitor of facsimile, its urban spectator is potentially in motion, freed from a fixed position and addressed not in a theater or in his or her living room, but in the street. 80 years after Gideon's book, Building in France, Diller's video suggests that the key to understanding the contemporary built environment remains bound up with the modernist paradigm of mobility as the vehicle of intelligibility. As the cost of pixels continues to lower and it becomes cheaper to build urban media facades rather than conventional walls, the future of the architectural surface, as I suggested at the beginning of this talk, is very much uncertain, and it's an open question. If architecture is not simply to become a vast display surface for commercial images, new forms of spatial interpenetration and communication, new forms of media architecture, such as the example of facsimile suggests, must, and I would argue, should be developed. Thank you. And one final comment before questions. This is, of course, what we find when we walk out in public space. Everyone connecting to the world through his or her own private screen. And there's a way in which this project is much more prescient today than it was when it was first designed. Because the idea of having a single large screen, I would suggest to you, has much more resonance in a world in which we're all looking at our own private ones. I would be happy to take questions.
To your, the first four points or charges to a better media architecture early in the lecture, would you say that these new medias, these new technologies will, or do you see their place in the actual realization of the design more than just a representation or a post-representation? Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Now we use photography in design, or a rendering photography. Do you see that the accessibility to film and digital media becoming an important role in the actual design, in realizing those four charges? Does that make sense?
Well, the simple answer, of course, is that it already has. Anyone who designs spaces of any complexity designs fly-throughs and various simulations of them. And my understanding is that this is what every office, even the small size, can do these days because the technology has become so accessible. But I would maintain my main point, which is I don't think it's really changed the definition of media architecture very much, which still to me seems locked in this idea of display screen. And one of the reasons I like this project is that it moves around the side of the building. It's not a quantum leap, but nonetheless it's an advance. We have something that's more complex than simply taking a monitor and making it into a billboard. It's something that has a greater level of ambition. But I still don't see as many different possibilities as I can imagine might be being pursued. It seems to me that in some ways this field of media architecture is kind of a non-starter. It really has died before it even began. And there's a book you can all right away get for free. You can actually get a free book called the Urban Screens Reader, published by a Dutch media institute. And if you look at most of the work in that book, it's not very interesting. It's not really challenging. It's not really engaging. So I guess my question is why? And one of the answers is that it's so incredibly complicated to do this type of project. As I hope I suggested to you, it raises tremendous technological problems. And if you really want to get this to work, it does take a long time to come up with a design that works. So, in some ways, media is part of the design process in a way it never was before, but it's still not part of architecture. I guess that would be my answer. Sharon?
Well, I mean, I think to pick up on that question, we started to talk looking at the role of the screen in the architectural projects of Dillard's video. But this project seems to be much more in the chronology or the development of projects like the installation projects, like the one in MoMA. So it borrows a lot of the kind of use of the place of the video and the way in which it's projected into the space of the installation. And so, in a way, what it is, in some respects, is the trajectory of the art installation into the space of the city. And it's telling, I think, that they responded to the RFP for the art piece of the project, not for the architecture. So I think where the question maybe comes from is how this then, this which is architectural but is conceived within the realm of the art piece, then where does it find its way in, or how does it find its way into the actual spatial production of building as building? So had Dillard's video been charged with the design of the Moscone Center West, or whichever one that is, and managed to retain the 2%, which the architect never actually can, they're not allowed to do that. But suppose they had, what would that mean to the building itself as an architectural project as opposed to an add-on sort of installation into the space of the city project?
Excellent question, thank you. Two responses. Dillard's video studied the work of artists such as Bruce Nauman and Dan Graham very closely. And I think it's impossible to imagine this type of project without the work of those particular artists, whose installations and whose use of video that they know very, very well. So I think you have to understand this project and a lot of their media work within that lineage. And it comes out of a certain exploration of video and liveness and space that develops in the art world in the 1960s and 1970s. I mean, as an anecdote, Gensler, as this project was being designed after Dillard's video won the commission, absolutely hated it. The architects who were responsible for designing the convention center loathed it. They found it irrelevant, they found it superficial, they were forced to collaborate with Dillard's video, but they did so unwillingly. And I think you're absolutely right, this project is a supplement. It comes along after the fact, and really after having looked at the various options, Dillard's video realized that the only option that was viable was to work on the facade. I had a conversation today with the editors of your Fresh Meat review, and we talked about how being an architect involves working with limitations. And these were the limitations of this particular project. They were not going to be able to really do anything other than on the facade. And the building was already designed. They were not going to have the building redesigned. Their arena, their theater of operations, if you will, was the facade. So, it may be too little, and it may not be significant enough to make a great impact, and it certainly is not going to change what I regard, and I suspect anyone who actually visits these banal buildings is really banal architecture. It's not going to change that. But I think it suggests to me how this particular studio has an optimism and a belief that they can make small interventions in the existing fabric of the built environment and do them in ways which are suggestive and thought-provoking, which don't necessarily entail completely changing that which is already built, and recognize the limitations of their control. And they had very little control. They had almost no control over the Moscone Center, other than being able to attach their project to its facade.
It's an interesting project in that it, in a certain way, makes people more conscious of themselves in the space and sort of around it. Particularly how you said that people, there's a group of people that don't want themselves projected, and then there's another group of people that want to capitalize on this projection of the Irvine. Do you think it's a bit of a shortcoming, all of the scripted film that they had to sort of supplement the project with? In terms of, wouldn't it be enough just to put these cameras that film out and film in, and then sort of force people to engage with that at various levels, whether that means shutting it off or whether it means sort of claiming it as their own and projecting out?
For me, this enriches the project because it introduces the element of undecidability. You don't really know when or where what you're seeing is taking place. I mean, I think that's what I find so suggestive. You look at an image, and when you see the people in the hotel rooms, I mean, I don't think anyone would look at those images and think the Moscone Center is a hotel, and that what you're seeing is taking place inside the building. But it complicates the mix, and you don't really know when the image is taking place. You don't really know where the image is taking place, although you probably figure out very quickly that the hotel room scenes were pre-recorded. And in some ways, listening to your question, it reminded me of precisely where we are in the larger culture of moving images, which is that there are people who want every dimension of their lives to be available to everyone, and those are the people who set up webcams in their apartment and broadcast the most intimate details of their lives to the entire world. And then there are people who, on the opposite extreme, completely shun any type of publicity and have unlisted phone numbers and don't want anyone to know where they live, and completely guard the details of their private lives. So, what's interesting about this project, if looked at from that range, is that it moves between these two extremes. So it allows for the possibility of showing things taking place inside the building, and also presenting, turning off the camera, so things taking place inside the building are not broadcast, and also for displaying images which were pre-recorded and thus much more like films. Question?
Yeah, just Sharon was asking what happened to the architecture. I wonder what happens to the city. All the projects that you showed at the beginning, where one example was the highlight looking out over the street. You also said facsimile the screen effects to the city were tested, and I wonder if you could speak more broadly about that relationship between architecture and the city, and what happens to, we're speaking about the built environment or to the urban environment through this kind of what I guess we term media architecture. Is it a kind of incorporation? Is it one way? Is it both ways? Does it dissolve the boundary?
In the context of this project, we don't really know because it's never really worked. That's the banal but honest answer. I mean, I think we have to ask the question again once it's working, and once all of us can stand on the corner and watch it and see how other people react to it and see how it functions in the image ecology of the city. We're not there yet. I contacted the head of the public art program in San Francisco a couple of months ago, and she's very optimistic that this will actually be working sometime in the near future. They're still short of money, but she feels for the first time in a long while that this is actually going to be working one of these days. And
maybe to clarify that, just right, you're saying, well, the facsimile, they had only the chance to really work on the facade because they weren't really able to go into the interior. Yet in all the other projects that you're showing as well, there is something that from the outside is imported into the interior and vice versa. So there seems to be an interest in that boundary condition between the architecture.
I think the concern with scrambling those definitions runs throughout their entire work. They're concerned with taking what's outside and bringing it inside, and vice versa, taking what's inside and bringing it outside. Their boundary becomes much more challenging in the case of an urban installation where there are so many insides and outsides in the city. You know, what does it mean to look at this piece when it's working from a taxi cab passing by? What does it mean to look at it from inside a building across the street? What does it mean to look at it from different positions in the street? What does it mean to look at it from inside the building? You know, there will be so many different views and presumably so many different meanings that you know, I think it will change yet again. And you know, I'm trying at this point, given the state of its realization, to keep an open mind and to not be too certain about what it actually would be and what it actually would mean. So you know, I sense that I haven't really answered the question well. But you know, I think the thing to do is to invite me back after it's working, and you know, maybe I'll be able to do it better then.
Yeah, I have an observation and question. It strikes me that the work, even though it's legally described as an artwork, it's architectural in the sense that format trumps medium. I mean, this is what I find interesting about the project. When I talk about format, I mean the correlation between the window and the correlation between the window and the size of the film module, I think is very architectural way of looking at the problem. Which then leads me to a question about your interest in all of this. I mean, you laid out what you thought the challenging in your architecture should be. So the way you laid out, you're showing us basically what really you can do for an architectural avant-garde project. Given that you come from visual studies and film, how do projects like this advance from the other side?
But that's a great question, and it's fascinating to realize that no one invented the zoom lens with the idea of making certain types of movies, or no one invented deep focus cinematography with the idea that Orson Welles would make Citizen Kane, even though deep focus cinematography was extremely important to Citizen Kane. Or no one invented lightweight 16mm cameras that were involved, that were used for filming battles in the Second World War, and that later became important to the American avant-garde film movement after 1945. So the technology in film develops, and the uses are discovered later. So in some way, I think what you're suggesting is that Diller and Scofidio have reversed the typical scenario. They've thought about the technology, and then they've created images specifically for this technology. And what's remarkable to me about the images they filmed for this particular screen is that this is the only screen on which these images will ever be broadcast. You're not going to see these images on your television set. You're not going to see them on the Criterion DVD of this project with someone like me offering a commentary about them. It's never going to happen. I really don't think so. It's a project. And the one thing I really understand without any uncertainty whatsoever about Diller and Scofidio and media is that they don't want their work to become generic video art that can be shown anywhere, in any context, under any situations. They really demand site specificity. So this is an extremely site-specific project.
So are you then saying that architecture has actually produced new kinds of images in your field? Is that I know that's a general sum up, but I mean, see it from the other side.
I mean, it's certainly produced a new way of thinking about the relations between interiority and exteriority. Diller and Scofidio really want to make movies. I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated by what sort of movies they might actually make. And I suspect they would be really intriguing. But they haven't done it yet. And they're still working with an architectural context. So, I'm not sure how far I'm comfortable suggesting how their work has really innovated in the world of moving image production. My sense is that there aren't very many filmmakers and video makers who are really aware of it. Perhaps more now than was the case 5 or 10 years ago, but I haven't seen a lot of films that suggest that there's a dialogue taking place between their work and what people in film production, even experimental media and video production might be doing. So, I think it's a conversation that hasn't really become a full-fledged dialogue yet. That's the way I understand it. Should we end here? Maybe this is a good moment.
Yes, thank you so much.